Hello everyone and welcome to Phoenix Gaming. I'm your host Nick Henning and today we are covering the Frosthaven class, the Snowflake. If you don't want spoilers, you should close this video immediately, but I assume that you opened it because you want to know about the Snow Dancer class, which is the Algox class, which could be the first class that you unlock while playing Frosthaven, or maybe one that you get maybe about halfway or 2/3 of the way through the campaign, depending on how you got or what decisions you made, I guess, with the Algox plotline in particular. If you follow my Frosthaven videos, you know that I've been very slowly playing through the game a second time. I'm playing at 3 players right now with my mom and sister, who are not quite as experienced in the game as I am. And we play on base difficulty, just kind of difficulty out of the rulebook, and generally have, like 100-ish% win rate. I think we maybe got really close to losing one sometime, but playing at base difficulty certainly is well in bounds for what we're at. So I'm evaluating this class from that perspective. I'm going to say right off the bat, the Algox Snow Dancer class is extremely party dependent. I think more so than any of the classes in all of Frosthaven. And so I'm going to talk about some things today, and honestly, you can kind of throw half of them out depending on who else is in your party. I don't want to give spoilers on what other classes look like in the campaign, but I'm straight up just going to tell you right now, there are some classes or some class compositions where this support class primarily really shines. I did not play in a party that I think really benefited this class all that much. I played primarily with Drifter and Banner Spear, both sort of more melee, straightforward characters. And I did not find that a lot of the support stuff in this class was terribly amazing for what it was doing alongside those two characters. There are other characters where I think you really get to excel a lot. And so this is a character that I would definitely advise you to consider, like, where you're playing it and what role you want to be playing. So I'm going to kind of try to be evaluating it from both perspectives throughout without giving spoilers along the way. Very minor comments along the way. Let's focus on the stat block here. They say that it's a high support class with some good ranged ability. I think that's fair. As far as ranged attack goes, most of the time this class is not really packing much of a punch, so I'd punch that ranged thing down another notch. Control, though, definitely on the higher side, especially depending on how you build this class. So I think 4 is about right, or maybe even 5. But ranged, I'd notch down a little bit. Mobility, I was not terribly impressed with this class, so I don't know that that's a fully accurate assessment. But other than that, I think most of what's going on here is pretty spot on. And it is a pretty straightforward class. It's actually kind of interesting that they made this low complexity class behind an unlock. The class doesn't really actually add that many different rules. It essentially just asks you to understand how hazardous terrain works and make sure that you understand rules about pushing and pulling throughout the game. So we're going to start off with the reason that this class I think is quite fun to play, especially if you understand movement dynamics throughout the course of the game. And it is the pushing pulling aspect of this class. The sort of like Storm Tempest idea here thematically is borne out in the character primarily through many pulling and pushing mechanics. You're going to be a lot better in scenarios that have traps or hazardous terrain. You can create hazardous terrain that you can push or pull enemies into. And if your allies have anything that helps you out for pushing them in various areas, that can be really useful too. Every once in a while, that would really help set up a nice Banner Spear combo. But there are definitely other classes that that you have not unlocked yet, or maybe have, that I think really benefit from this character being able to shove folks around the battlefield. And the starting card here is the kind of prototypical example of what I think a lot of these pull push cards look like. It is a very basic attack with a very impressive push on it. Honestly, like, this is the kind of attack that actually almost reads like a disarm for the right melee enemies. And so Lifting Gust, I think, actually punches way above what it looks like for the 1 damage. It's lower on your initiative count. So against zombies and things like this card actually just does a ton of work. It can take an enemy out of combat for quite a long time, particularly at lower levels. And so I actually quite like Lifting Gust a lot as you're leveling up. And then that bottom ability, that 8 jump there, lets you just do some shenanigans in certain scenarios. There's the infamous scenario with all the eels that, if you've not played it yet, I hope good luck to you when you find it. But using this lets me cheese certain scenarios like that. So a really nice one-off ability that comes in here or there, and a great way to just convert into a couple extra experience points along the way. This, by the way, is a class where the experience points is really based on that, like, the wizard construction in Gloomhaven, where using your cards one-off abilities is the primary way you're going to get points. And you're an 11 card class, so you've got lots of losses that you can throw away. Speaking of cards that you can use for losses, here's another push. The bottom of this card does a lot of work. You're going very slowly, but you're going to move 3 and push 2 spaces, which is pretty nice. Gives a fair amount of flexibility, and actually a lot of times in this class, you kind of want to go last. You don't really want to be tanking. You want to see what the battlefield looks like, manipulate it, set it up for next turn so that your friendly players can then decide what exactly they want to do with it. And then if you want to, the top part of this card can do some shenanigans if your opponent's set up in a really nice little bomb circle that you can do. So fun card, although the advantage on that attack doesn't last for a long time, but I used the bottom of that card for a very, very long time. This is a card I had a harder time working with. Actually, with Banner Spear, I used it a little bit more early because my Banner Spear made a lot of wind. This allowed me to make this a little bit better of an attack, make me kind of a bit of a mage, where I can be doing 3 points of damage and scoring an experience point. But the pull here is kind of odd. It moves them towards your allies. So this is a card that I think punches above its weight class when you have enemies who are doing immobilize effects on your melee friends, or melee friends who might just want to not go places. So the Drifter was a really good ally to have for this card. I used it a decent amount at lower levels, but it really ended up getting outclassed pretty quickly. The bottom of this card looked really exciting. Just tons and tons of people that could be pulled in my direction. And I don't know if it was the scenarios we're in or that it's 3-player or whatever, but I found that this did not do as much exciting stuff as I kind of thought it was going to. I thought it was going to do crazy stuff on the bottom, but I really only ever got to pull off the ability, once or twice, and not in a way that was like terribly memorable. The top of this card, the bottom of this card, by the way, is very similar to our preceding card, the move 3 and push 2. It's just that you get to push multiple enemies here, which I think is, all in all, I think I would take the move 3, push 2 just for the extra movement speed. While the back of the card said mobility was high, I found movement to actually be pretty difficult to this class. And so I would personally lean more towards that card, although the upside of a really nice scenario where you can push something twice is really nice here. Plus the slightly lower initiative. That being said, I did usually take both of them into the scenario. The top of this card is one. There's a couple cards like this in the starting kit for this class. At the start of your turn, so if you use this as a lost card, persists. At the start of your turns, if you do forced movement abilities, then you can do additional damage to enemies. So this is the way that you're really going to be turning into a mage class if there's another person in your party, or if you're very good at dropping a lot of hazardous terrain. There's not enough hazardous terrain like creation though for this to be kind of the sole structure of your class, in my opinion. I leaned pretty heavily on hazardous terrain. I still felt like there wasn't quite enough to really make a full push build worthwhile. So I think if your party comp is good for it, or if it's the right scenario for it, then this was a little bit more exciting to use for top ability. If you had other experience, I would love to certainly hear in the comments, folks who managed to pull off Chilling Impact as like a structural base this character, because I really wanted it to. And then this is the other side of exactly that same card, where you can use essentially elements every turn, and if you use them, you make elements every turn, which is going to allow you to do some more of that wizard stuff. However, you're basically nullifying the ability of some, or reducing the ability of some of your force movements. A lot of the time, this isn't really going to matter all that much. Like, your forced movements are really big pushes most of the time, and you tend to put the hazardous terrain only just 1 or 2 spaces behind an enemy. And so just as a question of how much those elements are worthwhile to you, I think they're better if you have a party that takes advantage of your constant creation, because I didn't find this class to be the hungriest for elements of classes that I've seen and played in Frosthaven. Next comes our fundamental support cards, and what I mean by that is just cards that do healing and how good healing is. In earlier versions of Frosthaven, in Gloomhaven, I know that people didn't really like healing, and I think even still the more expert players of the game don't like healing, but I like healing, and particularly playing with folks that are not necessarily as cautious with initiative weaving, healing ends up coming in handy a fair amount of the time. The bottom of this card is just a move 3. Like I said, mobility tends to be a problem for me, so the move 3 heal 2 does work by itself, and the 21 initiative is something that this class really needs. It is definitely on the slower side. The top of this card looks really cool, like you're doing mind thiefy stuff from Gloomhaven, letting people meander around in various directions, walking onto your hazardous terrain and stuff like that. I used it once or twice, but when I first saw this card, I thought that the loss ability at the top was just absolutely nutty bananas, and I was wrong. They were just, by the time that I would set up a really good room for it, half the enemies would be dead anyway, and so I ended up mostly just using this for the bottom of the card, but the bottom of the card honestly does plenty of work. I'm perfectly happy with it. White Winds was a card that I tried a few times that I really liked, but it didn't last for as long as I quite wanted it to. It's a healing that you can drop on an ally and they can move. Really, it's the 11 initiative that I really cared about in this card that allowed me to do whatever I was trying to do on another card before enemies kind of moved out of formation, or if I want to put up a certain kind of wall or whatever. Every once in a while, I got cute and got to do some White Winds stuff with a 4 damage whip and push people and get the multiple experience points, and that was pretty exciting. But lining up this card is deeply fun to figure out, but also a gigantic pain in the butt mentally, as you're like kind of rotating this wind whip around the map and it's not quite working one way or another. I used it a few times, but it didn't last for very long as I continued leveling up. Cold Therapy is another one of the cards that you're going to be using a lot more. If you use that card there, you generate elements every turn. You want to play a little bit more of that mage style. You can score a 3 damage attack here with a muddle, but like a 3 damage attack is like not the most thrilling that you have to do some work for. So I'm not blown away by this for that purpose. That being said, I played this card constantly because I thought the bottom of this card was incredible. I had multiple ways to make elements. I had an ally that made wind elements as well, and so the amount of healing that this generated throughout the course of the scenario, primarily for my allies, but even if they're far away, me getting rid of quick poisons or wounds, or even just the raw healing itself, dropping this early in the round because you're kind of a ranged character, like you don't really need the movement in the early parts of the combat, and then just having it up and available was insane. So the bottom of this card, I think, to me, was a fundamental structure of playing this class as a support class. Keep in mind that I was supporting a party of mostly melee bruisers who kind of charge into the mix of it and really did need the healing support. Speaking of healing support, Snowball here is a card where the top just does normal healing-ish stuff. It's kind of a low-powered card, I would say, but it makes elements. If you have that other card down, you can do a lot of healing. This is a really good room transition card where your allies have kind of mopped everything up and you just kind of want to clean up and start heading to the next room. So it does that, and I took it for a few reasons. I always wanted to make the snowball effect on this card, the bottom of this card, work, where you do kind of more of the wizard thing and your attacks go +1, +2, +3, +4. That basically means that the bottom of this card, if done correctly, is essentially like a 10 attack, just divvied out over 4 attacks, which seems really good to me. I never really got to pull this off to its maximum effect. I think I'm just a little bit reticent on when I wanted to use these powers. I mostly did not play the mage build anyway, and so I can't really weigh in on how good or bad Snowball was. I just found that I couldn't really set it up and execute it in the way that I wanted to, but I certainly could imagine for someone that was a little bit more focused on that they would manage pulling that off. Our next cards here are the battlefield manipulation cards, I guess is what I'm calling them. And there are actually not as many as I really would have liked in this class. I took Frigid Growth with me constantly because I really liked the pull-push mechanisms of this class. I really like battlefield manipulation. I'm generally the one who manages the monsters and where they're moving. And so outthinking the algorithm of how they move is a really big part of my fun in this game. And so being able to drop hazardous terrain and do shenanigans with that is great. I very, very rarely gave allies strength with this because there were usually better spots for me to be putting that hazardous terrain. A lot of times this would be the default card that I would play going into a room where I didn't know what the monsters looked like. Not that I was the one who usually breached the room, but sometimes I did. And even if I was going in second or third into the room, this was just a good way to set up, I'm making an ice, I'm going to heal somebody 2 next turn, I'm going to drop a hazardous terrain somewhere very annoying for the enemies. It actually does a surprising amount of work, so I really liked Frigid Growth. I played it all the time. Every once in a while, the 2 jump at the bottom came into play as well. So I played this constantly. But again, I kind of was really focusing on that battlefield manipulation build. And so, take what I said with a grain of salt here. The Snow Fox here is a decent little ally who's going to actually live for a surprising amount of time. It's always loses ties for selection in initiative order. It's a fast little fox moving 3 spaces per turn. So it lives for a surprisingly long time for a level 1 minion. If you just want to pack some extra punch going into a final room or even in the middle room here, and I think summoning this guy, he's going to last for quite a while. So he could do a fair amount of work, and then the bottom little jump is fine. I didn't take this for ages. I'm not... well, you'll see when I talk about the level 2s why I didn't focus too much on this particular card, but I summoned it a few times and I was never that disappointed with it, unlike some summons that just get kind of deleted because of the fact that I was playing with other melee players. This essentially just ended up being a very small damage boost every turn, which works out nicely against enemies that don't have shields. The last couple X1 cards are just my other category. I really couldn't come up with something for them. The top ability here is just another really fun looking attack that does some random nonsense. If you can get all of these images together and do 4 damage and a push and a disarm. Honestly, just 4 damage and a disarm is pretty insane. If you can set up the sun and ice to do that, you can do the ice, but maybe you have an ally who makes sun. I think that's a really powerful attack for a loss attack. And then the bottom is a move 3 jump. Like I said, movement's not the best with this character. This is a fine card. That being said, it didn't do enough role playing, and I didn't use that top ability enough that I tried it a few times. I pulled it off a few times, and it didn't feel worth it for the rest of the times when I wasn't pulling it off. If you're playing more of the mage build, you might also do Spirit's Call here, which I put into the other category because I didn't really think that the mage build was entirely focused for the mage build. Yet again, we see a kind of weaker attack that turns into a real attack if you are making elements here for a 3 damage and a hex, which is completely fine. I never once used the bottom of this card to push allies and bless allies or whatever. This seems like you could do something with it if you had some specific plan and in some specific scenario. I'm sure you can pull off some cool shenanigans with this. I never really saw a place where I super wanted to do it. So I didn't play with Spirit's Call pretty much ever, and I think that's okay. Crosswinds, on the other hand, I really liked. Like I said, I play with melee characters, so just giving them a little bit of extra movement and an extra wallop was generally just a lot better than me doing a ranged attack. As you notice, the ranged attacks that we talked about usually with an element were 3 damage and some status effect. This instead is 3 damage and someone else moves, and I get to support someone who has a better attack modifier deck than I did. So I found Crosswinds as my primary offensive card most of the time. In addition, the bottom of this card does a lot of stuff. A lot of flexibility in the pulling. Usually you're pulling an enemy, onto an obstacle or something like that. But you also can pull an ally just somewhere safer or out of an enemy's reach if they're, only doing a melee attack that turn but not moving. Actually does a lot of versatile stuff. And so Crosswinds punched way above what it looks like on the card. I really was impressed by this one. At level 2 here, we have some choices, and I made one that actually is kind of surprising to me. Starting with Tornado, we've got another one of these kinds of like big funky area attacks that also lets you move people around. I think this is a really solid loss attack for this class. No really additional comments about it. It's not mind-blowing, but it completely does its job, does a fair amount of damage, can hit a lot of people, and do even more damage if there's, traps or hazardous terrain in play for you to take advantage of from those enemies. The bottom of this card is what you're using more often, obviously, for that reason. And then jumping and pushing is nice and solid for this class. But we already have cards that move and push, and so while I think this does exactly what this class wants to be doing, I myself took Birds and Tempest here. One of the main reasons I took it is for the 18 initiative. I noticed that short of that Winds of Winter or whatever card that has the 11 initiative, I didn't have anything below a 20, and so the ability to go fast really mattered to me. As I said, I also supported a melee group, so this bottom move ability where I move 3 and allies have +2 and jumping on their turn generated a lot of additional. It's essentially the bottom of this card read for me 7 movement, which is crazy for a non-loss card. And so that just did a ton of work. And then remember how I said I didn't play the foxes that often? That's because if I turned into someone who wanted to do some damage, I would just summon a couple owls. They would get in there, and a lot of times I would be going at lower initiatives anyway than my allies, so I didn't need that initiative tiebreaker loss to keep the fox around because the owls would just be in the mix with my friends. They would tank them and the owls would stick around just pummeling, extra couple points of damage, making you a very bad summoning class if you want to pivot into doing that. So Birds and the Tempest I thought at first was like, I took it and I hemmed and hawed for a long time about Tornado, and in retrospect, I think it was absolutely the right choice. Polar Vortex is a crazy fun looking card where you pick a spot and everybody gets pulled into it. Very thematic, well templated. I love what they're able to do with this card. The bottom's a loss ability where you get to shoot a couple people and do some damage. I think if you're playing a more aggressive build, if you need to be bringing more of the heat onto the battlefield, I could see this being the card that you take. Polar Vortex, needs a little bit of support to actually do anything though, and so I decided I got cold feet about about taking it. Instead, I took Cold Snap. A big part of that was that I was really excited about the hazardous creation and the pushing and pulling, like I said, about this character, and I was not disappointed by Cold Snap at all. 2 1-hex hazardous terrains and adjacent featureless hexes is easy enough to just drop underneath enemies or in front of you, make a wall, make a line out to people. You can automatically make enemies suffer some additional damage if they're doing that. Because I was playing with Banner Spear that would sometimes pull other enemies onto hazardous terrain, I actually did get to trigger this with 3 enemies. This is very rare. Usually it's just 1 enemy, 2 unblockable damage, but it also just sets up the battlefield in a way that is really nice. The 86 initiative looks really bad, but actually a lot of times I'd want to set up the initiative at the end of the round. So I would initiative weave this on the backside, cut into the enemies in the way that I wanted to, and then we would kind of build our next turn game plan off of that, which I really liked. And the bottom of this card isn't too shabby either, just throwing some healing towards an ally, giving them the strength to breach the door the next turn or whatever it is. Doesn't suck, but I did mostly use this for the top of the ability. I wouldn't blame you for taking Polar Vortex if you were playing more the mage build, but I did like Cold Snap because that's the part of this class that I enjoyed playing most. I think I took the wrong card at level 4 though. So Biting Frost is a lost card that does an absolute wallop, 6 or 8 points of damage for an ally that has probably the best attack modifier deck out there. Just a crazy amount of damage on a single lost card for level 4 seems worth it. Plus you're at a really fast initiative, so you can kind of know that you're setting up your ally to have some monster turn. If they can get into the mix, you go before them, they hit somebody, and then they have like a bottom attack, top attack. They can do some crazy stuff. You also haven't seen a lot of move 4s with this class, so just the move 4 alone on the initiative 16 is well worth it, and I think is probably the correct choice for this class. On the other hand, I was really in the support mindset, and so I took Zephyr Barrier here, in part because this wind here was supported by the Banner Spear ally that I had. Getting to throw around a couple points of healing is fine, but then getting a throw on the barrier, whatever this is called, the half damage, on the next attack really does a lot of stuff. Plus, you can use the bottom of this card for my favorite ability in the game, which is permanent 1 shield, but you give it to someone else rather than yourself. So really, really leaning super hard into being the team support here by doing that. And it was fine. I should have taken Biting Frost. I think that Biting Frost just does a little bit more impressive stuff when you use it as a cash out. Maybe Zephyr Barrier just generates enough value over time, but I found myself not necessarily wanting to do it right at the beginning of this scenario. And I think part of the thing that I found with Snow Dancer that I was very awkward about dealing with was you start with 11 cards. And so ideally, I think you want to be using 2 lost cards in your first cycle. And I always liked dropping the lost card that did the 2 healing every turn from the first. And a lot of times I would use a lost card for like a big bomb attack in the first turn, or wind whip or something like that. And because I did that, I didn't want to end up putting this shield down as the third one. And so that was a little bit more awkward. If you're just going to be more infrastructurally based and not use those big one-off abilities elsewhere, then I think that using the bottom of this card's a little bit better. I maybe just didn't take the best advantage of it, but I would recommend Biting Frost even though I took Zephyr Barrier. I'm actually not quite sure what the right thing to do is at level 5. So Whipping Gale here, the top attack is just kind of like a shoot multiple people, pull them attack. I don't think that one's terribly amazing unless you have party members who are just dropping tons of hazardous terrain for you. You just don't make enough hazardous terrain to make this really work. And because they're pulling towards you, you need to be standing in the right spot for multiple enemies to pull them over things. And so I just think it's a little bit hard to trigger appropriately. The bottom of this is really fun though, the constantly pushing people. If you have wind every turn, you can certainly set up a guaranteed make wind every turn, push pull people. But if you do that, the level 1 card that lets you make wind or ice every turn. It's going to make this only a push or pull 1, which is less exciting. And so I would love to hear from folks that have had success with Whipping Gale, but on paper, it didn't seem impressive to me. So I took Shifting Snow in large part for the initiative and because I already had some push stuff and I liked making hazardous terrain. So I use the bottom of this card constantly. The move 3, create a hazardous terrain was sort of the bread and butter of this card. I don't think I actually even used the top of this card even once because you need to make the hazardous terrain, then move the hazardous terrain to hit people. And, it did 2 or 3 unblockable damage. This is worth it if you're fighting the kinds of enemies like fire demons or whatever, where you just need to find a way to like cheese through the shields and you can't find another way to do that. That's legit, and that's a nice mode of this card that you can use that's not a loss. But for me, it was primarily just a bottom card, and it completely did its job as the bottom card. Solid role player in the build for sure. We're starting to move into speculative territory for me. I did retire this class at level 5, so I'm just talking about how I would have treated these cards going forward. Frozen Brand is a card I would have taken purely for the gimmick. The fact that this looks like a snowflake is unbelievable, and huge credit to the designers for making this choice. Having this ice explode around an ally is convenient. I don't think you're going to hit as many things as this quite looks like. In some situations, though, this is just going to be absolutely goo goo gaga bananas good. And maybe if you set up your ally in such a way that they could be completely surrounded like in the next turn because they, you give them like the +2 jump from the birds, they can really set up a huge move with this. However, the fact that it is both a push and if you use the ice and immobilize for enemies, actually does a fair amount of work. So I think this is a pretty cool lost card. In the bottom, the move 4 jump and make an ice just does everything I wanted to do. So I'm pretty sure Frozen Brand is the right choice here. Refreshing Flurry here with the heal and the bless, nice value. You also get to heal and move the ally if you have a wind accessible to you. That's great. I think that's a solid role player card. But I think just having the move 4 jump for yourself is a better solid role player than Refreshing Flurry. If you don't play the little more healing support like I did by playing that bottom card all the time that does 2 healing every turn, then yeah, I guess I could see this being more important as like a one big, punch heal. And that's completely legitimate. But like I said, I think the Frozen Brand does a little bit more of the role playing. And then the lost side of this card right here is to make this cat that's got piercing and wounding. It's really good at killing anything with shields and low hit points. I think that seems okay. For a level 6 summon, I'm a little worried this just gets shredded a little bit too quickly. So I'm not in love with that summon. And I think it's only, right in the right scenarios. So I'm probably using this card more for the top. But again, I'd lean Frozen Brand. Okay, both of the level 7 cards seem nuts to me. And I'd love to hear which ones you take because I'm struggling to choose myself. Freezing Storm at the top gives a solid attack where you shoot a couple people for some damage. Hooray, it does the solid, like a fine mage lost card. The bottom part here seems really good though. Moving, creating a hazard, and then pulling them directly onto that hazard. Does a lot of stuff for a bottom ability that you can just kind of use over and over again. Not to mention that it supports other cards that you're going to want to be using as this character a lot of the time throughout the next rounds. And so, I could see pairing this with that Cold Snap card, the one you get at level 3. You end your round, you move somewhere, hazard, pull someone towards you. Next turn, you go, you drop some more hazards, and now every enemy standing on a hazard takes damage, and then you run away, or you move somewhere and then like push one of those enemies onto like maybe one of the hazards that didn't have an enemy standing on it. This is pretty cool. I think Freezing Storm is probably the card I would have chosen. That being said, Stormwall here is also very cool. The top ability is a non-loss, but looks like a loss card. It doesn't pack a huge punch, only doing an attack 2, but it pierces, it pushes, and it attacks a huge number of enemies. And not only that, but if you have wind, it essentially triples the area of attack here, just doing a basic point of damage, but there's a lot of value you can generate this. And I think in a 4-player game, Stormwall would be sort of like the snap decision just for that reason. And then vice versa, maybe in a 2-player game, we don't really care about it as much. The bottom of this card, though, is exactly like our card that we took from earlier, where, you're giving it to an ally. And instead of getting a shield permanently, they get one of these barrier things for half damage throughout the course of the whole scenario. On the right scenarios, this is nutty good because There are some rooms, some scenarios where it's like, oh, there's a bunch of imps. Yeah, okay, you don't want the imps to just like take these away, but you're gonna know when you're gonna want to use the bottom of this card. So I think the right choice here is Stormwall, even though I really love the bottom of Freezing Storm here. They both seem really good. I'll have to see what the level 8s look like because I might come back and get another level 7. Level 8's kind of confusing to me, honestly. They're really good. They're just confusing. I'm going to start with Endless White, which is the card I don't think I would take. First of all, it's a 5 initiative, which lets you just go first pretty much against anybody, which is pretty cool. I don't think there's a lot of times I explicitly need to go first to this class, but having that option in the right circumstances is always good. The top ability here is really strange. You minimize the ranged effect of enemies. So it's sort of like a bad disarm, and I guess it also makes those ranged enemies want to charge closer to you. So this is a lot better if you're playing in a melee based party and you're worried about those like ranged flyers or whatever not coming towards your party, forcing archers to charge ahead. And so maybe I'm discounting how good this is, but it doesn't seem that amazing to me. Given that you also have to decide that you're playing this card before the like enemy like AI decisions are revealed, I just feel like there's going to be a lot of times where it ends up being very disappointing. So you're going to always have to play this card where you can play the top or bottom half of the other card that you're playing with it. Now, that being said, if you decide you want to flip to the bottom of this card, it's obviously nuts. A move 6 is crazy on this class. You don't need to be moving 6 all that often because you are kind of ranged and you are pushing and pulling people around and trundling behind your allies for most of it. So it's not like as important as it is for other classes to have that move 6, but having it available to you is really good. So if someone is doing crazy stuff with Endless White, please let me know. But I think that this is not the card I would choose. I would either go back to one of those level 7s, or more likely I would take this level 8. The Surging Blow attack is really nice. 2 attack 3s with a couple pushes. Definitely makes me, look at that and say I really want to make sure that I'm just pounding different people. You can target the same guy instead of flying across the room. You can target 2 different people. I think that there's just a lot of power in that attack. And the bottom of this ability also has a fair amount of flexibility. Healing, throw an ally somewhere else, give them a strength. So I could play the top and the bottom of this card pretty much comfortably, always, happily throughout the scenario. And so Surging Blow for me just seems like it's such a solid role player in a set of cards that I'm using a good number of them situationally that I'd really want to put Surging Blow in my deck. All right, so level 9 again, like kind of Frosthaven does a lot more of the like funky level 9s than the like obviously busted level 9s that we saw in earlier versions of the Haven games. So Snowblind right here is an attack that can disarm essentially up to 2 enemies if they're in the right circumstances. That seems like a great solid control card that requires you to set some stuff up. It's a little bit on the slow side. I think that this card is extremely good if you're pairing it with one of the cards that lets you put hazardous terrain on the bottom, like with a move ability. That's really where Snowblind is going to shine. You charge up, drop a hazardous terrain, pull an enemy towards you if you're doing that card. And so I think this pairs a lot more with specific other cards that you put into your build, and probably would have been the one that I would have taken as well. The bottom loss of this, I find unlikely that I'm going to fire off in a scenario all that often, given that I want to be triggering the top of this card. But it generates a lot of blesses if you're playing in a 4-player party especially. I can see just jamming this at the beginning, putting a lot of criticals in the deck, and then just leaving it up to the YOLO gods to see if you are lucky throughout the scenario. This is something that I would try if we were facing a scenario that for some reason we were finding too difficult and needed to play repeatedly. Might be a really fun approach to doing that. Winds of Change, although I probably would be taking Snowblind, is also still very exciting. The top of this card is something similar to what we've seen before, just a lot better. Shoot a lot of people, make them wander around in random directions. Not random, you're going to make them walk onto hazards and things like that. And probably it's a really solid lost card for level 9. But you're going to obviously be playing the bottom of the card, and the bottom card is also very good. A move, huge heal to an ally, doesn't need to be adjacent, so you got up to 5 range essentially on this healing. And then a really funky ability here that I'm kind of blocking with my shoulder, where they can like shuffle, they can lose a card to pick up a card from their lost pile. It doesn't give them any like card advantage or stamina advantage. It just allows them to manipulate what cards they've lost along the way. Um, and that seems fine, I guess. I don't know how often I'm saying to myself, oh, I really need to do that. But I guess by the time you're this level, there are probably a couple cards that are more fundamental to people's builds. The number of times that me and my allies have gotten to level 9 before retiring is very, very limited. So I don't have a strong opinion on this card. The bottom here seems good, but since I did a little bit more of the hazardous terrain build, I think the Snowblind seems better to me if you have the supporting bottom move cards. The Masteries on Snowdancer, I didn't actually trigger either of them, but I think if you said to yourself, I'm going to do the Masteries, you can. I think that they're not too difficult to do if that's explicitly your goal. The top one especially, even the level 1 cards, you put in the level 1 card that says, make a thing every turn, then you put in the level 5 card or whatever it is that says, push an enemy or ally every turn, and by the time at level 5, essentially this can be an auto game mastery for you. If you're not doing that, you have to spread out all your cards and then specifically weave your pushes and pulls every single turn, which is possible. Probably requires you to be a little bit aggressive in terms of breaching doors and things like that, but I think you can certainly pull this off if you want to, even pretty early in the game. It doesn't require having that level 5 card that I'm talking about. It just makes it trivially easy if you do. The second ability here is really interesting. Ensure the first ally to suffer damage each round directly before suffering the damage has at least one condition you applied. So you don't apply a ton of conditions to your allies. You apply some rejuvenates and you apply some barriers. And so I think that this card is primarily geared towards that, I think it was a level 7 card, the Stormwall card that you gave to an ally and gives them a barrier token at the beginning of each of their turns. It seems like that's specifically geared towards this mastery. I'm curious to hear of other people, using revitalizes or something like that, manage to, fire this off otherwise, but I think it really seems geared towards that one card, which I don't like. I don't think that these are not my favorite design masteries of the masteries in the set. I like the mastery system, mastery mechanic, but for me, didn't really do it. I like a random 1 heal on an ally. That's just a fun thing to do. You don't attack that often with this character, so I found that I was not caring too much about the attack modifiers in my deck so much. You'll see that when I get to commenting on some of the later ones. This seems completely fine, and I don't care that much about it. The one after this that immobilizes enemies can be very, very exciting. A lot of your attacks are doing damage and pushing at range, and so I think that that's just a surprise if you're looking for a really big upside. However, I'd really just liked adding the +2 element cards just to ensure that I was constantly firing off that 2 healing every turn that I really like doing. So this is one that I grabbed and it was fine. This one right here I think is not amazing. You need your attack to push the enemy. It does an extra point of damage if it does. Otherwise, it doesn't really do anything. It's not really improving the quality of your deck. So I thought that these did not seem terribly impressive to me, unless you're only taking push attacks. But I don't know. That doesn't seem like enough. Same with this next one. I think strengthening an ally, bumping a 0 to a 1 just doesn't seem as exciting as the chance of the upside of doing a mobility or something like that. And I could see certainly saying, hey, maybe a strength is better than a healing. And I said that I like the healing one, but I find that I when I'm losing scenarios, it's a lot more because I'm losing to poison or wound stacks than it is because I'm saying, oh, I really need this friend to do +1 or 2 damage thanks to the fact that they have strength on their next attack. This card, however, I really, really liked. Throwing a healing and a barrier on an ally for redraw just seemed like a really great addition to the deck. So loved drawing that every single time. It never misses. So these support ally cards sometimes have it just there's no one ever to give it to. This can't really miss. So I thought that was extremely powerful. I did not think that whenever you long rest, generate a element seemed all that important to me. However, this next one, I don't love going for the doubles on it. So sorry, not the next one, the last one. So we'll talk about the next one. I don't generally love going for the doubles. I didn't do this one either. If you make tons and tons of elements, sure, you get to do some revital. You get to do a lot of supporting stuff. And I guess this specifically pairs with this mastery here, but it's only when you short rest. You need to have the elements available to do it. It's fine. But I don't know if it's worth the double box for me unless you're really going so crazy heavy on support. But I think your cards do enough supporting already anyway that that's not where I'd be going. On the other hand, this one here I found to be absolutely nuts. Giving enemies muddle at the beginning of the scenario and every room that you breached into. Just essentially made sure that you didn't have any crazy like opens, bad guys come in here +2 critical, like you get wrecked. It just did a lot of texturing of the game and prevented bad guys from doing things. On the other hand, it was good for breaching. I didn't find it that good at the start of a scenario because a lot of times it's easy enough at the start of the scenario to just avoid being shot by an enemy based on how the starting room setups are. So it was not as good at the beginning and I was disappointed at first, but half the times when we breached rooms, I found this to really punch well above its weight class. I cruised through this commentary about the Snow Dancer. I think that I had a fun time playing this class in terms of I wanted to do some supporting for my mom and sister as we were playing, and I had a nice time with that, but I don't find this class to be the most fun that I've had in a while. I think part of that is just a reflection of the low complexity of it, and I think that the most fun you can have with this class are the kind of really obvious pairings that you'll get as you unlock certain classes. So my recommendation to you, if you're playing through the campaign and you feel like, ooh, this seems like a really good combination with that class, it's probably going to be because you have enough other options to do some magey stuff, to do some pushing stuff, to do some hazardous stuff, to do some healing stuff. You can fill a lot of roles throughout, but I found that doing damage was very challenging. You don't do a lot of negative status effects to enemies. You're really more about making sure that your allies are well managed, the battlefield's well managed, which is fun gameplay for me. But I would say that Snow Dancer is like solidly middle of the road in terms of how I enjoyed the class and how powerful I think it is. I think it's closer to like Tinker and in Gloomhaven than most of the other classes in terms of how it plays and how it feels, also power level wise and everything like that. So Snow Dancer didn't blow me away, but I did have a nice time playing them. And I think that I do actually think that the design of Snow Dancer is very clean. A lot of the Frosthaven designs are messy. They're maybe even a little bit too ambitious, whereas Snow Dancer is very clear in what it's doing, and I think it executes what it's doing quite honestly and quite well. Just doesn't have the same sort of like power up crazy moments a lot of the time. Even though you look at some of those cards, you're like, oh, I can hit like 9 enemies at the same time or whatever. And if you pull it off, more power to you. But I think it's going to be fewer and farther between than those cards look like. So that pretty much brings me to the end of talking about Snow Dancer. I am on to playing. I retired and actually we have not unlocked many other classes. So I'm actually off to play some Geminate. So I've already technically made a Geminate video, which I had a friend kind of walk me through as I thought I was never going to end up playing it, but I might end up doing another one depending on how much I'm liking a class. We'll see. But other than that, I think my next Frosthaven content is to do some catch up on puzzle books, which a couple of people have asked me about. So I will try to return to that. I actually managed to dig the puzzle book out and just need to remind myself how to solve those silly things and start going through it. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye.